Hello, everybody. Welcome to a MECLA briefing. MECLA is the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance. My name's Hudson Worsley and I'm the chair of MECLA. Today is going to be a terrific session learning about some very important work led by the Green Building Council of Australia, looking at the Nature Positive Roadmap that they currently have out in draft form for consultation. So we are being consulted. Really looking forward to that session. Before we start, welcome. I'd like to acknowledge I'm joining you from Gadigal country of the Eora Nation, and Indigenous knowledge plays a big part in the roadmap. So looking forward to hearing how we learn from the longest owners of Australia, the longest people here. I'd also like to mention that this session is being recorded. We will have time for Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A function of this Zoom session, not the chat. Q&A, please. I'd also like to mention that as our MECLA community, you've probably heard that we are soon to be entering phase 4 of MECLA, and the call has gone out to ask you and your organisations to join as funded members to help pay for the Secretariat to keep us moving. Any questions, please do get in touch with us after this, because it's so important that we have continued engagement, continued collaboration. And that's only going to happen if we can get some funding. So please keep that in mind. MECLA's been very busy. I was in Canberra last week at a roundtable with Minister Bowen, with a roundtable of business looking to give the evidence that strong nationally determined contributions, the NDCs under the Paris Agreement, really are helping drive the decarbonisation of the economy, in our case, obviously around construction and materials. But yes, we're still out there flying the flag and pushing for the collaborative model for change. Now, I would like to introduce you to Ellen Monavari, who is going to talk us through this roadmap. Hello, Ellen. Now, you've also been heavily involved at the Green Building Council, leading the work on the Green Homes program. So quite a busy woman.
Busy, yes. And there is an interrelationship between housing as a driver for new developments and the roadmap. So there's always tie-ins and there's always cross-collaborative pieces that bring all of this together.
Fantastic. Really looking forward to the session. I think, do you know, the line that stood out to me most about this in the roadmap was moving from minimizing harm to actively protecting and regenerating biodiversity and ecosystems. I think a lot of sustainability professionals of my generation, a bit of grey in the beard here, we've spent so much time doing slightly less bad and getting our customers, our clients, our employers to move towards sustainability, but still about doing less harm. This shift to doing good, to regeneration, is just so encouraging. So with that, can I hand over to you? We'll come back as a group and talk questions afterwards, but really looking forward to hearing to this. I'll hand over to you now, Ellen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that nice and warm welcome there, Hudson, and lovely to be with you all today. I will now share my screen with you so we can start to have a look at some pretty pictures. I'm hoping you can see that now. But yes, welcome and thank you everyone for your time. So my name is Elham Monavari. I'm the head of Green Star Strategic Delivery at the Green Building Council of Australia. And it's my pleasure to take you through the Nature Positive roadmap for new developments. And I just want to see if there's a thumbs up type thing that says that you can see my screen. Okay, yep, great. Wonderful. So yes, let's go through so firstly, I'd like to thank our Nature Principal partner, GPT, whose help has been critical and support in getting us to this point. I can see that my colleague, Jorge Chapa, has also joined us too. So he's going to help field some of the questions that, that come through as well. So by way of introduction, the world is experiencing rapid and significant loss in nature and biodiversity. And this is being led by, through human activity. The human activity has also meant that some of the other threatening processes, such as climate change, which is also another key driver for nature loss, are really accelerating that species extinction, which we're seeing play out right now. It's also meaning that areas of nature and the sort of ecosystems are starting to shift as well due to some of the impacts of climate change. The built environment does have an important role to play in all of this, and particularly working alongside other intensive land uses such as agriculture as well. As Hudson talked of earlier, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people possess a deep connection to country, which is a really critical part of the nature roadmap, and we see this as being really integral to how we not only value nature, but also taking that First Nations knowledge and harnessing it for how to respectfully manage our nature impacts. And so one of the things I will note, though, for you today is that the work that we're doing on the nature roadmap builds on the work that the GBCA has been undertaking over the last few years, and I'll take you through that briefly in a moment. So it is continually kind of building on the different foundations that we've already established. So if there's something that you think is missing from the roadmap currently, it could be that it's already in some previous documents, and our website has some good has all of that in one place. So by way of background, nature and biodiversity has always been an important part of the Green Star rating system and the Green Building Council strategic objectives. However, when we started to look at some, after about 10, 15 years of using Green Star as our sort of key vehicle for change and driving change, we did a bit of a review as to how nature and ecology was being treated within the Green Star rating systems and whether it was achieving that stated objective. There was a Building with Nature paper that was released in 2018, and within that, it looked at all of the work that Green Star had done and acknowledged that while there was a lot of good foundations, that there was opportunities for improvement, and there were a number of foundational recommendations that were contained within that paper. Those foundations were integrated within the nature category, within the future focus rating tool. So nature went from being a few credits to being a whole category. That category does follow that sort of mitigation hierarchy. And the way that the weighting system works with the scoring meant that we were acknowledging the importance of nature as well. But as soon as basically the buildings rating tool was released, we acknowledged that there was so much work happening internationally that we needed to be cognizant of as well. And while that Building with Nature paper was really great from a foundational point of view for the future focus rating tool, with the work of the TNFD and the global biodiversity framework being underway, there was an opportunity for us to then reflect on how do we then take this conversation further and how do we set up Green Star and just our sort of trajectory more broadly. As well. So there was an update to that Building with Nature paper called Building with Nature 2.0, which was released a few years ago. And one of the recommendations out of that was to work on a nature positive roadmap. This roadmap's been under development for several years, and important to note that we've been engaging with industry along the way the whole time. Even before we went out to sort of that consultation last year, there was already some engagement undertaken. But we did release 2 discussion papers last year, and we went through and had some face-to-face workshops and took a lot of feedback on board, which it include many from the supply chain. There was a separate supply chain paper that was released last year that was really focused on this being a really critical area of impact and opportunity. In the draft roadmap, what we've done is we've brought the whole thing together again. So we're not having a separate roadmap for supply chain because we've taken all those learnings here. And I'll take you through some of the feedback that was provided as part of that. So the draft was, this draft nature roadmap was released at Green Building Day. We're out to consultation until the end of this month, and hoping that from that we'll learn a lot more and be able to finalize the roadmap. So this is what industry told us when we released the draft roadmap last year. Sorry, the consultation paper last year. These are the statistics specifically in relation to what the supply chain paper and those that commented on that paper told us. So one of the key questions that we asked them was when we were looking at nature investments in the supply chain, and this will start to make sense as you start to see some of the targets as well. There was this concept that we asked around, do you agree that we should be applying the proximity principle? The proximity principle essentially means that if you're investing in nature, let that be closer to where the area of impact is rather than not. So 100% of those that commented on that paper said that they supported that as a principle. We also asked the question around, do you support having the targets with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, put in place and aligning those targets to the supply chain. So there was 100% support for that. And then lastly, we asked a question around biodiversity net gain. Does industry support having biodiversity net gain targets for the supply chain? And that was 96% support for that. So it's important to kind of keep this in mind, because we often will look at well, we always do look at what industry tells us, because then it helps us as we're shaping and moving forward and putting forward proposals for industry. So the purpose of this roadmap is to firstly recognize the urgency of action that we need to undertake. Nature is in rapid decline globally. Wildlife populations are significantly decreasing. So there's that urgency from a nature protection point of view. There's also a recognition that we are highly dependent on nature. Within the built environment, that dependency is really apparent. You know, the built environment, like we build on land, and we use materials that come from nature as well. So that dependency is really critically important to recognize. We also know that the world is acting with the Global Biodiversity Framework. They've set 2030 targets and goals for 2050. Australia, important to note that Australia is a signatory to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and has committed to protecting 30% of land and seas by 2030. So there are those international commitments and the national commitment also made when it comes to nature protection. So really this roadmap is in response to those local and global drivers, and it is an industry roadmap to note. I will say as we sort of go through that this isn't a Green Star roadmap. This is a roadmap for new developments, and it does help to then lay out what does industry need to do to meet not only its international sort of not obligations, but these drivers will come from investors, but it also helps to ensure that the practical steps are in place. So the purpose of the roadmap really is to help industry to meet its what will come, the expectations of it from an international framework, but also locally as well as from the community and what those community expectations are. So the roadmap has includes, or the draft that I'm hoping you've all seen and you've all had a skim of at least, includes these three things. We talk about the scope of impact. This did go out to consultation previously, and there was agreement that these three scopes of impact are the right scope. So firstly, we talk about what are the impacts directly on site? What is the impact of that project on that surrounding environment? And what are the impacts from a supply chain point of view? And obviously, this is a very direct link to MECLA here today. The draft roadmap talks about the challenges, and I'll take you through all 5 key challenges, but we also talk about how those challenges then led to the establishment of the principles within the roadmap. And then we talk about this timescale for action as well. Because we had that high agreement from industry that we should align ourselves to the Global Biodiversity Framework, the key timelines that we've looked at are 2030 and 2050. We have got a few interim steps along the way just to help step industry through. One of the key changes that we made from the discussion papers released last year to this draft that's out for release now is that we are talking of a nature positive roadmap. Importantly, we want to make sure that that definition of nature positive aligns to global definitions as well. So within the draft roadmap, while this is an area that a lot of people will sort of skim and go, just turn that page quickly, but that glossary part is really important, and that's definitely a role that we see as being important, that we as the Green Building Council can help in that we can ensure that industry is using common language and common terms and really being able to sort of talk in a like-for-like basis. So the definition of the nature positive that we're using is a societal goal that is established by the Nature Positive Initiative. And then you'll see on the bottom there, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has translated that Nature Positive Initiative's goal, so definition, into what it could mean for the built environment. And it's effectively really looking at how can the built environment positively contribute towards not only halting and reversing nature loss, but also regenerating, and really looking at that full life cycle, which does include very much the supply chain, and to try and minimize harm and regenerate nature on a like-for-like basis. So we've sort of talked already a little bit about these scopes of impact, but again, just worth emphasizing again that these are the three different scopes around on-site. So think of that as like your different sort of scopes when it comes to climate as well. This isn't as well established as that climate conversation, but we think that these are the right ways for us to look at nature impacts as well. Important also to note is that nature doesn't sit on its own in isolation. There is this interrelationship between not only like having that community and country as that sort of central pillar, so like the heart of the roadmap, so to speak, but there is this interrelationship between materials, circular economy, climate, and nature that sort of sits around that as well. So we don't see these as being competing interests. We see this as an opportunity for us to amplify and ensure that there's an alignment between all of these different spheres, so that when we're looking at working with communities and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, that is also helping to address a number of these different issues as well. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind, that we've got that from a green GBCA point of view. There's the climate positive roadmap. The purpose of this nature positive roadmap is to be a really nice sort of addendum, or like a really good roadmap that sits alongside that the climate positive one as well. So ensuring that alignment is in place. So what I'll do now is I'll take you through the key challenges that the draft roadmap has identified. Firstly, we talk about not only just the increased level of urbanization, but we talk about that legislative and policy related issues as well. At the federal level, we've got the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. It's been the key legislation that's been in place for the last 20 plus years. The intent of that act was to try and address species extinctions and protect and preserve biodiversity. However, what we've seen over the last 20 plus years is that we've seen the rate of extinctions accelerate and increase in Australia. So Australia is unfortunately one of the global hotspots for mammals, like the loss of mammals and mammals extinctions. The way that this works often is that you've got the federal legislation. So we've kind of got our federated system. So the federal legislation does look at national in like significant species and ecosystems and what those matters are. But it really comes down to a lot of this implementation at the state level, where a lot of that sort of more state-based legislation can really help to ensure that those species are actually being adequately protected. So this example comes from a CSIRO study that tried to map what that sort of pathway would look like for a development if they were to go through government approvals and planning. And what that sort of says is that there is this mismatch and misalignment, and there's just like a bit of complexity that needs to be worked through as well. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is around the depletion of nature for land development. So it is aligned to that policy one. So a lot of land has been earmarked for development. What we're seeing is that some land that is agricultural land, for example, where you've got remnants of threatened and high sort of value ecosystems, are being changed from agriculture, for example, to urban development. So within the draft roadmap, we've talked about this idea of the land crunch. It's not that there is no land in Australia. Quite clearly, Australia is a very big country. However, what we are seeing is that there is these competing interests between different land use types, and effectively one of those areas is around trying to protect the remnants of those really highly and threatened ecosystems that are in place. So we've talked about some of those hotspots, and from a GBCA Green Star point of view, we're certainly seeing a lot of that come through from Green Star submissions, is that we're seeing those areas and that expansion really start to impact nature and biodiversity. So the way that the nature roadmap is addressing this is, firstly, we've identified that we need to prevent nature loss and we need to increase and connect nature as some of our principles. Within the roadmap, these are the targets that we've put in place. So firstly, it was important for us to identify where are we at now and where do we want to be or where we need to be by 2050. So what the proposal is that by 2027, so this is just a few years' time, we need to start as an industry, start measuring and reporting on our biodiversity values on site. By 2030, we need to be delivering no net loss of biodiversity through a combination of on-site and off-site actions. By 2035, we start to look at, we need to actually increase and have net positive. So we've got 10% biodiversity net gain. The biodiversity net gain is effectively like a calculation methodology, and it's in policy and law in the UK. And so, as you saw earlier on, there was a lot of support for using biodiversity net gain as a good metric and indicator within the roadmap. So we've got 2035 to deliver 10% biodiversity net gain. We've got those targets being the same for those two principles around prevent nature loss and increase and connect nature. But you will see on this particular slide that when we get to from like 2035 onwards, we've got two different tracks. Firstly, when it comes to, because the idea is that like by 2040, we should have been, protecting high value biodiversity. So we start to really expand it into, well, what the moderate value biodiversity as well. We need to ensure that through those sort of cumulative actions and that constant fragmentation, we're not having more species get into the high value. That is, they're moving up that threat curve. So we're expanding that to be no net loss of moderate to high value biodiversity on site, and then no loss of high value biodiversity on site. So that's an important distinction. It's very careful reading of the words, so that what we're saying that by 2050, we need to not only not remove high value biodiversity on site, but we need to also consider that we need to expand that to moderate value. So that's the sort of the first two challenges. Now, the next two challenges are very much in your bucket or your area of interest, which is around challenges when it comes to circular economy and also materials. So firstly, we've got Australia's rate of circularity is low, and particularly low when we compare it to international standards as well. Australia's economy rate of circularity is 4.4%, and we've seen that globally that's getting close to 8%. So there's definitely some opportunities there, and I'm sure many of you on this call are actively involved in trying to increase that. One of the things I would also highlight here, that when we went out to consultation last year on that discussion paper, we had circularity and materials as one principle, but we heard very much from industry that we needed to separate out circularity. And so that's what we've now reflected in this draft, taking on industry's feedback around that. The context of circularity that we've also used within the roadmap is that it's not only about material circularity. So if you sort of when I talked earlier about those land use changes and that sort of increased urbanization that we're seeing, we see that circularity can be a really good driver to try and increase the density within cities as well. So circularity isn't only about the materials, it's an important lever from a planning point of view for us to say, well, we need to, if we're going to protect and prevent further loss of nature, we need to stop the sort of the continual outward growth of cities. We need to try and consolidate and increase density, because we know that there are other drivers when it comes to population growth as well. So the circularity conversation also encapsulates that part of it too. And then we talk about resource use and impacts to nature. So materials used for construction have a significant impact on nature, and the construction of the built environment has, you can see the stats here, accounts for 50% of raw material extraction, 30% of biodiversity loss, 40% of waste, and 40% of global carbon emissions. So materials within the built environment, and when it comes to nature, is we're about like 95% or like 95% of the impacts are in the supply chain. So we know that we need to, within the sort of the sphere of influence for most new developments, they need to look at what's happening on site, but we're asking industry to also look at the wider impacts in the supply chain. The good news is that many of the material, well, there's good and bad. So the good news is that a lot of the work that many of you will have been doing on circularity and looking at the upfront carbon is really going to set up how you also look at the nature impacts as well. There isn't really a significant deviation between upfront carbon emission impacts of main materials and the nature-related impacts. When you sort of map them out, there's definitely a big crossover. There's some additional different ones when it comes to nature, but broadly speaking, you will have seen in the draft roadmap, we talk about the concrete, steel, gypsum, aggregate, etc. So this is an area that we see as being really important for us to get to a nature positive for new developments. Now, the way that the draft roadmap is addressing these is firstly, we talk about driving circularity as its own principle. We've acknowledged that the current rate of circularity in Australia is 4.4%. But this is an area which has been interesting as we've been going through engagement, and I'll be interested to see the sort of questions that come through within this forum. Is that industry, we know we need to start measuring what the built environment's rate of circularity is. So the first step we have there is like we need to first measure and report on the built environment's rate of circularity, and then start to put in place some targets to try and increase that over time. So we've got there 7.5% and then 10% rate of circularity for the built environment. And then you'll note from 2040 onwards, we don't have anything in place because we don't quite know, and this is where we're seeking your feedback and your proposals on what should happen after 2040, essentially. When it comes to choosing low impact materials, currently we've got some planning or like some legislation to that has banned the use of illegal or illegally harvested timber in the supply chain. But this is where we have this step process around how to try and start industry looking at their nature-related impacts. So firstly, we talk about choosing your top 10 materials. So each sort of new development will have to do a bit of a materiality assessment of where their top 10 materials, what their top 10 materials are, and then start to look at, well, do those top 10 and have a bit of a plan as to what to do about that, the nature impacts of those materials, and then over time ask the suppliers and the manufacturers to put in place plans and net sort of positive targets and ensure that by 2050 all of those sort of nature related impacts in the supply chain have been fully compensated and eliminated. So together with those targets, the land development ones and then the circularity ones, that will essentially get us to like a net zero, let's call it, from an impact on nature point of view. The other area of that's a challenge currently is that there's a lack of investment in nature. There's at least $7 trillion that's currently invested in nature, negative sort of financial flows that often goes from governments to subsidize fossil fuel, for example, industries, etc. So there's a massive opportunity for us to redirect that money towards nature positive investments as well. And this is where I think having that sort of cities-based approach can be really helpful too. So we've identified this as a challenge, that this is where we're currently at, that we need to really drive that investment. Currently, there's a lack of investment from the private sector. A lot of that investment that is made by governments, and often that investment is made from, putting in place protection measures. So think about, the money that is spent on national parks, etc., which is great. We absolutely need to do that. But there's definitely an opportunity for the private sector to step in and step up as well. So this is where we get to the positive part of the nature roadmap, because I said all those other targets are very good at getting us to net zero, but this is where we need to invest in nature to bend that curve, which is what is going to be necessary for us to meet our global biodiversity framework's 2050 goals. So again, we currently have the Nature Repair Bill, which was introduced in 2023, and we haven't put forward any specific targets here. So we are thinking is a proportion of a contract value that would be put towards nature restoration and improvement on a particular project as well. So there's opportunities to look at that spend during a project's life cycle on what they're doing to address their supply chain impacts, or what they're doing on site to increase and connect nature, for example. And then over time, we can increase that. So that's kind of the targets part of the draft roadmap. We've got these foundations for success, because one of the things I said earlier was around the importance of having First Nations involvement. Initially, we did have this as its own principle, but again, we heard very strongly from industry that they saw the need to integrate recognition of First Nations knowledge and connection to country against all of the principles. And so therefore, rather than have it on its own, sort of sitting in isolation, we have it as an important foundation for success. And we also acknowledge and know that we need reliable data, metrics, and methodologies for decision making along the way to ensure that we are setting up this program for success as well. So these are both recognized as foundations. So these are the targets as a snapshot. I'm not really going to talk about them much further, but it's just important as you're sort of looking through the draft roadmap to consider not only the targets as they go across that time scale and that sort of the way that the targets are being ratcheted up, but on any of those sort of key milestone years, looking at the targets going down so that industry understands what are the asks across the whole roadmap by, say, 2027 or 2030 as well. So we've been conscious of not only ensuring that we are addressing a lot of those sort of nature challenges, but also in having this roadmap be practical and that sort of practical stepped approach as we move through. Now, manufacturers and product suppliers have a significant role to play. We've talked about like this is where the main impacts of the built environment are. So there are different ways that can really involve the different members of MECLA, and they involve things like helping to contribute and establish circularity in the built environment. This is where the kind of the collaboration that you will do is so critically important because it will really help in trying to establish a lot of this up, whether it's common ways to measure and report on circularity, really looking at the increase and reuse and manufacture of recycled materials, which is all the work that you all are working on as well. Having these material specific targets and trajectories and sort of collaborating on and sharing knowledge on how to achieve all of those as well. That sort of reporting and disclosure of nature related risks too. Within the draft roadmap, we have done a bit of a mapping exercise of how does this draft roadmap also align with the TNFD, which is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And there may be people here in this virtual room that are already starting to look at doing that too. So this is very much aligned to what you would be expected as part of that as well. And really looking at things like, disclosure of those materials, environmental product declarations, and like over time, starting to look at net gain and driving investment even from a supply chain point of view to those nature restoration and regenerative investments. So that's kind of like where I might pause, and I'm happy to take questions as well. And I can see that there are some, and Hudson, is this where you're going to facilitate, or am I going to just read them myself?
I'll join you to facilitate, but of course,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
but
you.
we don't need to be too formal about these things.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, let's go through the questions and really encourage people do put questions into the Q&A. There's a lot of material there,
There is. It's
as
going to
you
take
said
some
at the
time to
beginning.
actually process it.
That's right. I think the fact that the draft has been through so much consultation probably indicates that the draft is going to be pretty close to what comes out eventually, but this is a good chance for our collaboration to have some say as well. One of the first questions, how does no net loss of biodiversity target, how does that relate to the use of Australian native forests, timbers, and non-plantation timbers? That specific, I reckon that's someone in our timber working group. What's your response to that one?
I think importantly to note for this one is that and even when we talk about the no net loss and the net gain in biodiversity, we're not saying that you can't remove, say, like vegetation as an example. What we're talking about is the sort of the quality of that biodiversity. So when we talk about no net loss of biodiversity within the context of the draft roadmap, we've got those those planning policy levers and drivers that are established that talk about, and that's all geared towards no net loss. So it says if you remove something here, then you need to offset and make sure that you're doing something somewhere else so that even if it's a lower quality thing that you're removing because of that investment that you're doing, it might be something on site that you're restoring over time, or even if it's off site, you're increasing the value of that. So over time, there's that no net loss, if that makes sense. So that's the first thing I would say is that even with that net gain, and I know it's not specific to the timber question that's come through now, it isn't saying that you have to put aside a particular percentage of your site, or that if there is some vegetation on your site, you can't remove it. What it is saying though is that if there is something high value, there's an opportunity to increase the quality of that. And again, it can be that through those sort of on-site or off-site options. I hope that answers the question adequately, but that's where that no net loss comes from. It's within the sort of the framework and the methodologies that are established, and we've seen sort of work where it uses those sort of combination of factors of things to improve quality on
Yeah.
site or through the off-site piece.
All right. So net is an important word there.
Net is
And
the
I
important word
noticed online,
there.
your colleague Jorge is on the
He is
scene
on the chat.
answering some
Thanks,
questions as
Jorge.
well. So
Well,
yeah,
I'm just clearing the easy ones. That's all I'm doing. I want LM to get the fun, interesting questions. That's the
yeah.
important thing.
Here's a bus, Alan. We'll throw you under it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Exactly what you want from your coworker. That's exactly correct.
Here's another question. Will the low impact materials principle also address low visible pollutants, such as chemicals like PFAS added during manufacturing or pollutants released at end of life, like microplastics? That's very topical considering PFAS in the water of the Blue Mountains at the moment. What's your thinking on that?
I think I probably don't know the full answer to the question, but I would
Hmm.
look at that within the sort of the framing of the scopes that we've talked about as well. So that would be an impact on near sites. The idea is that it would apply to the full life cycle of those materials as well. But from a materiality point of view, that's another key factor to consider too. Many of these things and some of the ones that you've highlighted there, it might be more like a cumulative impact thing for us to be cognizant of. But
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, it's around what are the key impact areas that we need to initially focus on, but it would include that full life cycle and the impacts on the near sites. Like what are yeah, that's it.
Can I add a little bit to that,
Yes, go for it.
Hudson,
Please
if
do.
I
Please
may?
do.
Because the question of PFAS and toxicity of materials and so on, it is intention in the low impact materials for us to look at, and plastics is one of the materials that we flag as like important in questions of the built environment, especially when you get to other things like fit outs and whatnot. But we do have the responsible products framework, as we note in the report, which is what we use in Green Star, which is kind of starting to be adopted by other entities as just a way of looking at what are the considerations for what low impact materials are, and material toxicity is picked up there.
Okay, because yeah, increasingly the microplastics question, which is it's just all pervasive, isn't it? Microplastics. So I think being able to address that is well, it's important for human survival and also all other species.
It is. Slightly unrelated for what it's worth, but related to a degree, specifically because of the PFAS question as well, is the
Mhm.
amount of PFAS in buildings there are significant amounts in refrigerants. So we are looking as well, and we are about to release a paper on refrigerants, which does specifically target the question of PFAS as well. And that's a genuinely big problem because once they escape, they're hard to recapture, whereas for better or worse, some of the building materials in buildings, they don't tend to go around escaping once they're installed, right? So that also matters. So we are looking at that toxicity elements of buildings, but ultimately for purposes of the roadmap, the toxicity of materials is included there, and plastics is one of the areas where we highlight this.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. Our friend Daniel Hogan from John Holland, a regular contributor to MECLA. Hello, Daniel. Is asking the question about, I guess it's the alignment with the New South Wales government's biodiversity policy, which also is aiming at no net loss, but using biodiversity offset scheme for that. How can the same targets be implemented in the building industry? So you've talked about no net loss. Where do biodiversity offsets fit into this roadmap?
They would be part of the the methodology that would be used to show. So I mean, currently offsets are used anyway within, as noted here, around land use planning. So for example, if you think about Western Sydney and any of those sort of projects that are impacting, as an example, like Cumberland Plains, like those projects go ahead, but then there is an offset scheme that looks at that. So that's how that no net loss is delivered. So there is a specific alignment with all of with that too. So that's where the offsets would sit. I would note, however, that when it comes to that sort of the investment in nature piece, which was that last pillar, we see that as being additional to what you would, the kind of offsets you would need for your planning approvals. But that's where that alignment occurs. I know that in the consultation that we've done on the roadmap to date, this is just the workshops that we've had over the last kind of few weeks that we've heard about the importance of ensuring that those sort of offsets and those investments are driving and demonstrating a nature benefit. So, there's definitely some opportunities for additional guidance on and recognizing that too.
There's a related question in the chat, and I'd encourage people to use the Q&A, but this always happens, not a big problem. Does the GBCA support current biodiversity offsets legislation, and isn't this at the heart of the problem?
Do we support the legislation? I mean, I don't know if I can currently comment on our sort of advocacy, but I mean, I would also again say that the roadmap coming out of it, and once the roadmap is released, there are policy recommendations within it, and there's advocacy recommendations, and we have been engaging with government at the different tiers, like federal, state, and local, and where there's opportunities for us to improve those sort of policies towards their impacts on nature and those regeneration and benefits, and we absolutely will put those recommendations forward. But I don't think I'm in a position to comment specifically on that unless Jorge wants to jump in and add anything.
Yeah, sure.
There.
I'm happy to mostly jump in a little bit, but because part of the work that I tend to do does flow into the advocacy side of things as well strongly, and so we work to provide commentary. And I mean, we did provide commentary on the nature repair bill, for example, that was put forward in 2023. Yeah. Well, when I say we, I mean mostly Ellen. You brought up a good chunk of that submission,
and also like the EPBC Act review, that independent review, we did do that too as well. Yeah.
So the current setup, I think what we're definitely saying in the report is the current setup doesn't work. The Ken Henry review, the state the review of the environmental legislation, all of those things are essentially showing there are genuine problems in the way the current program is set up. That is a separate problem to the question of, do we need to drive investment to restore nature, right? So the two things are related, but they are distinct. We are saying yes to the first bit. We will develop things. We will have impacts on nature. That is going to continue happening because we can't stop right now. And we have done a significant amount of impact. Remembering the Kunming-Montreal Protocol isn't saying just stop nature degradation. It is saying restore it, right? It is genuinely saying by 2050, we have to bring nature back to what it was. And that requires a lot of investment. So tools like biodiversity offsets can be used if they're set up correctly. That is a problem right now, unquestionably. But there are things, or there are mechanisms that exist that are actually leading stuff. And at this point, I should probably acknowledge that I am a board member at Greenfleet, which specifically is an entity that does this. And that's, to be very transparent, they do it very well. But that is effectively some form of a voluntary biodiversity mechanism. That's what we're trying to say here. We need to drive that investment. We do need to figure out how to restore nature more. Obviously, we also need to make sure we stop destroying nature, right? The two things go together side by side, but we need to address how to make sure the mechanisms to drive that investment helps.
And good on you with your Greenfleet activities. I've got their sticker on the back of my car because while I still have a hybrid, it does use gasoline. So those offsets are terrific.
As a board member of Greenfleet, allow me to continue encouraging you to keep supporting Greenfleet, even if you decide to move to an all-electric vehicle powered by renewables.
Thank you. End plug. Good job. Look, there's a strongly related question around whether there's an expectation for this to be market-led. And I guess that gets to the tension between what's the carrot, what's the stick. It's actually a very long, multi-section question. I think on Q&A, they'd probably be asked can you break it down into one question here? But yeah, is this to be market-led element, Jorge? And what's the incentivization? You mentioned Green Fleet is voluntary. I pay extra to offset the emissions from my family station wagon because what I do for a living, I know that that's important, but my neighbours don't. How do you, if we're moving into the building and construction world, how do we get, what is the incentive for people to act on this, to look at the roadmap and say, okay, as an organisation, we're going to move down that path. What's the
I think it's
trigger? What's the incentive?
I think it's a combination of government always has important roles to play when they not only establish these sort of frameworks and also the rules, so to speak, and they can also use their own procurement, for example, and what they do themselves as leading that change. However, there's also the market-led, which is the TNFD, for example, and the expectations from investors that will also be asking around how are you considering your nature-related impact. So I do see this as a combination of market-led, but also government also providing the incentives. And again, going back to the feedback as we've been doing the engagement, there's been a lot of conversations around having government provide some sort of incentives. So maybe in the initial term, the government needs to do more to provide those incentives for the built environment to start really investing in this. Within Green Star, for example, we have the nature stewardship credit that's in place as well. We're starting to see that being taken up. And when I was in Melbourne, there was a very excited person that came and talked to me about that, that they're working with a developer on this and it's going to be world leading, etc. So I think it will happen. The market led will occur because those drivers, whether it's from their customers, their tenants, will come through. But I do see that government also playing a really important role as well.
When you talk investment, if
Yeah.
I just playing the hard-nosed businessman kind of devil's advocate for a moment, if I go and invest in a warehouse, it'll give me a cash return on investment. If I buy shares, I get a cash return on investment. If I invest in nature, what is the return on investment there?
So if you're saying like if you're looking at what your offsite sort of investments are, the return would be, I think, just sort of demonstrating leadership, demonstrating credentials and standing behind those types of things is where I think that investment piece comes in. It is more difficult, and again, this is the feedback that we've received from industry that there is almost like a systemic change that needs to occur when we're talking about nature, because it isn't exactly like this is my return on investment. There's a dollar thing. We don't generally value nature, so we need to start even valuing it properly and appropriately. And we talk about those sort of ecosystem services that need to be adequately valued so that when you do that investment, you can say, well, this is the value that is providing, more broadly to society. So yeah, there are some systemic things that do need to change in the way that people view their nature impacts.
And to add to what Ellen is saying, Hudson, which I think is very important, right? Like we invest on tons of things that don't have return on investment, right? Like that is very important for all of us to recognize. The marble the marble bench top that you brought in from Italy is not a return on investment, right? Like that's the type of things we do over and over again all the time. But there are valuable things about investing in nature which are actually surprisingly important. One is, it turns out most people really like nature, actually. So they do like the experience of being in natural spaces. I mean, we all do. And not only that, but say, for instance, if you're doing investment in nature restoration, the act of seeing of bringing back nature is surprisingly rewarding. And so there is a story. Like you are not just investing, say, in a carbon offset where you don't know what the activity is. You can literally see the tree being planted. That has value for the people doing it, personal value, but that has also value from a business perspective and from a strategic perspective and a brand perspective. So you can tell a lot of stories around that question. The second thing,
sorry.
No, you go. Go on.
Yeah, no, just to build on what you were saying, is like, for example, I have been having conversations with people that say actually they find it easier to show and demonstrate the value, even at a business level, that the businesses find it easier to demonstrate that value of nature than they do for some of those sort of climate and carbon related activities, because it is more tangible and physical, and there is that human connection to it. So there's that part. So I'm just building on what you're saying there.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
100%. Like that is wildly important. Yeah.
Yes, and just to remind viewers at home that I was playing devil's advocate. I definitely.
No, we understand
Yeah.
that, Hudson. I have
Okay.
tweeted this. Hudson hates nature and does
Yeah.
not think it has any return on investment. That's
Yeah.
there. That's fine.
How do I
It's on
get a
LinkedIn.
Rolex out of this?
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
seen right through me. Okay, good.
But also, sorry, if I may, there is a second part to the story, right? Investing in nature isn't just investing in offsite restoration and calling it a day, right? We divert or we use very typical materials all the time that impact nature. Part of the thing that we're advocating in the roadmap isn't to just go and buy offsets, but to look, for example, at your supply chain. And so if you're going to buy $1,000 worth, or well, $1,000 won't get you much. If you're going to buy, tens of thousands of dollars of structural building components, right, whatever material they are, you have the opportunity to divert your investment, because you're still going to buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of structural components, to something that has more nature positive qualities. That is also investing in nature. That is not, you're still getting a function out of it, but you're no longer destroying perhaps as much, or ideally you're even restoring something through that activity, nature. That is important as well, right? Nature investment doesn't just mean buy an offset, destroy here, buy an offset, walk away, but also looking at your investment strategy. So it may not need to have a return on investment, because all you're doing is instead of doing that, you're doing that. And that matters.
And that's that offsite of the concentric circles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you can build that. Yeah, you can look at
Yeah, of
this,
course. Yeah,
your
definitely.
spend.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can look at your
Yes.
spend and divert it. Like the thing that the UN is saying is, yes, we do need to invest in actual nature restoration. We should be trying to figure out how to divert money to that activity, which tends to not have a lot of return on investment. But also, we should also make sure that whatever you're investing in, or you're purchasing, or you're doing, and so on, is nature positive, because we need to shift that investment to that side for those industries to also exist and grow.
So that kind of comes back to that proximity principle that I talked about earlier around the sort of the nature investment piece, where there was like 100% support for the sort of applying that proximity principle, which is exactly what Jorge is saying there too.
Terrific. Slightly different tack now. A question around green space. Is that valued or only biodiversity? So landscaping type greenery versus restoring native forest or original indigenous habitation. Where does green space fit into this?
There is it's recognized, that there's obviously values and benefits of having green space altogether. But within the draft roadmap, we do define nature and we do define biodiversity as well. So biodiversity is a key component of nature. It's an important part of it because it helps to ensure that those sort of systems are resilient, so on and so forth. So it's not to say that having green space is not valued. It's valued, but it does also apply that sort of scientific lens as well, to say that, well, let's ensure that there's also the benefit of that being biodiverse and it's contributing to because that's one of the challenges, right, with nature as well, because it's not the same from here to the city. It's different. There's different microclimates, there's different conditions. So it's not always a like for like. So while it's valued, we do also apply other elements to it too. And that engagement with First Nations is also really important, and even with the community and what they want and what they value as well.
Thanks, Ellen. What about the concept of irreplaceable nature? One of the questions around, the concept of no net loss, but does the roadmap take into account the principle irreplaceable nature, or is it solely based on the principle of net gain?
Irreplaceable nature indicates that there's something that's really high value and critically important. So, that global biodiversity framework is like we need to stop and reverse the loss of nature, is where that would apply. So I think foundationally, that was another element that went out to consultation previously, which was around the mitigation and conservation hierarchy. So most of what we are saying within this roadmap would be in alignment with that conservation and mitigation hierarchy. I don't think we're saying that we should completely ignore what's happening on site and only solely focus on what's happening off site. They both do need to go hand in hand. So irreplaceable nature, yes, it is acknowledged, and that's what those top type of elements are trying to address, and that's why we're going from only looking at the high value, but also expanding it over time. I think it's important for us to also note that 2030 is less than 5 years away. So this roadmap is going to come out, either end of this year or next year, say. So how fast we can, like, there's a genuine element to consider around how fast can we as an industry move, understanding the urgency of the need to act as well. So I think they're the kinds of things that we're trying to balance as we're developing these roadmaps.
We're fast approaching, speaking of time, we're fast approaching the end of this hour as well. But yes, Ellen, it's good to remember we're halfway through the critical decade. So yeah, time is of the essence. One of the questions CJ Wilson has asked about, the temporal dimension of this, the timescale of revegetation of biodiversity, restoration of biodiversity takes a very long time.
Yeah, I saw that note. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you respond to that? I know the roadmap is long term, but a lot of development life cycles, you get in, you develop a piece of land or a property, and then you're off. You're on the developers onto the next one. How do you address this temporal disconnect between quick in and out versus biodiversity takes generations to be healthy?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how to address the question, because I would think that through the different sort of elements that we've got in place, we're addressing it to a degree, and noting that currently our rating tools do have requirements in place around protecting nature and biodiversity on site. We do incentivize restoration and regeneration and increase of biodiversity on site. And we also do have in place requirements around making sure that there's a proper management plan in place, that particular, whatever you've planted actually thrives in the long term. So I think the temporal piece is a really important one. And I think by that, if I can deduce that the suggestion is some targets move earlier or not, that's sort of good feedback for us to hear. And I suppose as far as like next steps with this is concerned, we are out for consultation. These are our initial thoughts and ideas that we've put forth to industry. If industry has any suggested changes to what we've proposed, we would love to have that feedback in writing, because ultimately that's what we want from all of you on the call today. To get that written feedback is really important. We'll take all of that into consideration. Ideally, it would be great if we can have that feedback not only from yourself as an individual, but if there's like organization wide ones as well, that would be great to hear, so that we can take that into consideration and
right. So I was actually going to finish with the final question, saying, Ellen and Jorge, what's the call to action? Clearly, it's to give feedback.
Yeah.
Where do people go, Ellen? Let's be practical. Do they go to your website? Do they?
Yes. Yes, please go to our website. If you go to the website, I think if there's a drop down thing and it takes you to the nature page, or just put in like nature positive roadmap for new developments draft, it'll take you to that. I'm happy to, I don't know, Jorge, if you want to drop it in the chat, the link.
I am literally doing that as I'm doing that.
Thank
before
you
everyone
very
disappears.
much. Before everyone disappears. So yes, within that,
Brilliant.
there's a survey that you can do. And look, we're happy to take feedback in whatever format you want to give it. Completing the survey is great. If you want to compile it and give it to us as a PDF, great. If you want to write to us as an email, that's great too. We'll take it all on board. But ultimately, we'd love your feedback. So that's the key call to action.
Actually, I'm going to give it to Hudson. Hudson, if you can put it in the chat, because I can't answer the chat. So if you don't mind, I've sent it to you.
No, it's there. I can see it.
Yeah,
oh,
you can see it, but it's
yep.
only, I can't send it to everyone on the chat. So if you can do that for us, that would be fantastic.
Will do.
But otherwise, all people need to search is GBCA Nature Draft, and you'll get to the right page. That will also help. But if you can put in the link, that'll be fantastic.
Terrific. Hey,
and I note that we didn't get around to all the questions. Apologies, everyone.
We haven't. And one of the questions that I'll answer live was, will this be recorded? And the answer is yes. This will be in the MECLA library where we have our events. So you'll be saved in posterity. The slides will be there for people to look at, and this information can then be shared with others. All that's left now is for me to thank you very much, Ellen and Jorge. Really love just free-flowing conversation and genuine answers. So much work has gone into this, and many of us know a lot of the people who have contributed. It's a very thorough, globally aligned document and approach to this big challenge. Really do love that. As chair of MECLA, I really encourage people to respond. I think shaping this, and the more of us who are involved, the more validity this will have. And so that's really key. I'd also like to thank Alexi Barnstone and Kati Vahan from Climate Kick, part of our secretariat, who really behind the scenes make so much of this happen. So Alexi, thank you, mate. This is great. And Monica Richter, as ever, is behind the scenes helping keep MECLA do the doing. Encourage all organisations to have a look at the stage 4 proposal. Talk to the people with the purse strings in your organisations and get them to sign up, contribute with MECLA as a paid member, and we can keep doing fantastic work like we've seen today. For now, thank you, everybody. Really great session, and look forward to getting onto that roadmap, past draft and into implementation. Thanks so much.
Thanks,